Hey, frogs and toads, welcome back to Dr. Lemco's Creative Club. Today I'm joined by Amelia Knott. She's a registered psychotherapist and art therapist. She's also the author of The Art of Thriving Online, and she's the purveyor of the Anti-Hustle Art Studio. Today she therapizes me in the making of one of these. Want to know what it is? Why don't you watch and find out? Amelia, thank you so much for joining us. Right off the bat, what color do you feel like today?
Oh my gosh. A good
I'm
question. You
getting
know what? My Do you have any hints to what it might be? um no, I think today, you know what, my ADHD medicine is just kicking in, the caffeine is kicking in. So it's
nice.
probably the
Yeah,
insides are matching the outsides. It's something bright like this kind of lime green chartreuse as per usual.
nice.
How about you?
Do you find, do you mean that there's the ADHD meds and the coffee, or is that the meds?
Oh, it's both. Yeah, Vyvanse
Okay,
and
okay.
a coffee are
Double
having it out
whammy.
inside my
Oh
body and
yeah.
brain right
You're
now.
gonna like start solving some math equations and stuff.
Yeah, my apologies if I get a little bit zippy.
Oh, no worries. We're here to get zippy. So for those who aren't familiar, you're an art therapist. Can you kind of the TLDR of what that entails? What is art therapy?
Yeah, so essentially, art therapy is a specific discipline of psychotherapy where instead of a therapist just using conversation as their modality, they also use different kinds of expressive art techniques. So when someone comes to see an art therapist, they'll probably talk, but they'll also probably make something. So that could be any medium. They might paint, they might sculpt, collage, they might use language like in poetry or movement or sound. And I think it's really useful because sometimes certain things we feel are really, really tough to put into words. And especially
Mhm.
if we've experienced trauma or if we're neurodivergent, right? So having art or the realm of the visual, I think helps to kind of expand that expressive tool belt and help us access things that we might not be cognitively aware of.
Totally. Is it, I guess it differs for each person, but how much of it is talking versus creating?
Yeah, you nailed it. It really depends on the person. Like I have some clients where they'll make something between sessions and then we'll get together and talk about it, process it, look at it. Right? That's really what the art therapy training helps a clinician do is sit with someone and like look at their work and dive into a conversation to pull meaning from it. But other
Mhm.
times the work and the therapy really is kind of sinking into like bodily sensation and making for a full hour or a full session. So totally
Yeah.
depends on what the person needs, whether it's more emotional regulation or whether they're seeking insight. It can really depend on the person, the session.
Yeah. It's so funny how there's probably still people out there who are like reluctant to go to therapy. And the reality is sometimes it's just like draw a picture. That's like the
Yeah.
scary thing. Yeah, it's
Well, I
crazy.
think sometimes it
How
can
do you,
take the barrier down, right? Like
yeah.
it's if talking or like the idea of sharing an experience that a person has had is really intimidating, then knowing that you can go to a therapist and not talk and work with art material can be a bit less intimidating, right?
Yeah, for sure. What do you say to people who claim that they're not creative?
I think this is the phrase I hear more than anything. Like if I
Yeah.
could count the number of times I've heard, "Oh, I couldn't do art therapy. I can't even draw a stick figure." Um, I'd run out of things to count. But I think we've all grown up in a society that has really busted our ideas about what creativity and talent means, right? So many of us had that experience probably in elementary school or middle school where we were asked to do some kind of art assignment that relied on accuracy, right? Or relied on a certain kind of technical skill, right? And usually those skills are kind of Eurocentric in value. They're about precision, certain kind of motor skills. It's something that could be bought or sold,
Mhm.
valued kind of under capitalism. So I think a lot of us learn falsely from a young age that we're not talented if we don't meet that really narrow definition of what good art is. So I think art therapy is really cool because it's really about unlearning all the ideas of what a creative experience should be.
And I'm curious because you have like such a unique perspective on it. Because correct me if I'm wrong, you went to school for like art. Is there anything that like what I'm curious what triggered the shift from like one end of the spectrum to the other, because you're going from where the finished product matters the most to where the finished product is like one of the most irrelevant parts of it.
Oh,
What was that change like, and what kind of triggered that shift?
I mean, first of all, it was kind of gut wrenching. I think that was the thing I struggled most with in grad school becoming an art therapist was releasing all of that art school training, right? Art
Hmm.
school is about kind of sitting and critiquing the work and letting other people's interpretations really inform the process. And like you said exactly, it's a lot about how the final product lands. And art therapy is the opposite. It's so much more about how the process feels or what we discover along the way than what the finished product looks like. So I think I had to really like recalibrate what my artist identity was
Hmm.
and let go of what I thought was impressive in myself or what I felt was valuable in my own creative process. Like the art I make now is so different from what I was making in my early 20s.
And are you, I got to assume that like the process is different also when you're not focused on the outcome as much. Are you enjoying it more this way, that there's not as much like quote unquote pressure on it?
Yes and no. I mean, maybe my unpopular opinion is sometimes I kind of miss that art
Hmm.
self. Like there's a reason I went to school to become a painter. I love like grappling with a composition in that way. So I think there's certain parts of my brain that feel really tickled by just like diving into a totally spontaneous process, making a mess with like no idea or expectation of what the final product will look like, and making something that is kind of low skill per se.
Hmm.
But then there's also a part of me that just loves making a painting in the way I've learned to, or like really going for it with the skills I've developed
Yeah.
over the years.
Yeah, because I really think that the feeling of having an idea and it existing in your brain and then having the ability to create it in reality, that's like one of the coolest feelings a human could feel. Do you still find time to like produce the ideas you come up with, or is it mostly stuff that you're doing as a practice?
I think my practice these days tilts toward more process based work, but I mean, I also think there's therapeutic value in that like self mastery feeling of having an
Hmm.
idea and executing it in a certain way and feeling really proud of it, like putting it up on the fridge, or I mean maybe even putting it up on the internet, right? If that's a part of our practice. So I think I think the balance for me, and this is a moving frontier, maybe like
Yeah.
80% of the work is really about the process, and there's a kind of a 20% reserved for like sometimes I just really want to make a painting, right? Like a capital
Yeah.
B painting.
Should we hop into some sort of art and then we can keep chatting while we produce, or do you think that the art practice is going to be all consuming?
Oh, it's a good question.
I'm going to just
Yeah, I just get whatever you need ready.
we could we could hop in and keep chatting if that works for you.
Yeah, let's do that. It's interesting. I mean, I'm thinking from an art therapy perspective now too, like how I often sit back when someone's in process, right? Like sometimes it really feels all consuming and like being in process takes up a lot of space. It's hard to do both, but also sometimes like the
Yeah.
conversation weaves in and out. Let's dive in and try. And if process takes over, amazing.
I'm totally figuring out how to do that. This is one of like I think you're the third one I've done, so I'm figuring out not only how to keep a conversation going while making art, but also like I keep forgetting that I'm like the host and it has to be like like be funny and be engaging and be entertaining. It's tough to balance so many things, but it's a really fun challenge I'm really enjoying so far. So yeah, let's dive in and keep talking.
And you know what? I mean, just to kind of get meta for a second, like this is
Yeah, let's get there.
there's something about like doing an art process with the anticipated audience of the internet. I mean, that's what really this art project is about. So we're kind of having this process where you're going to be doing something about how we relate to our work being seen or how we edit our creative process, but you're also doing it while kind of in performance mode as well, which is perhaps perfect.
Um, since this is a collaboration, I have some choices for you to make. You said start with
Okay.
paper.
Hmm.
So I have three options for you. Do you want a standard piece of white? Do you want a green? Or I have this paper that this like 600-year-old man that makes by hand, and it's handmade recycled paper. It's pretty thick, but these are your three choices.
Oh gosh, this is such a foreign experience. I'm going to do the meta process again. So normally, like if I'm in an art therapy session with a client and they kind of defer to me to make a decision, I turn it right back on them, right? I think it's in, like in an art therapy context, it's so much more empowering for a client to feel the agency of making a choice themselves. So I'm going to turn it back on you. When you look at these three different materials, what's speaking to you today? Where do you gravitate toward?
I'm looking at your screen and I'm seeing a lot of green, so I'm gonna stick with the green.
Yeah.
Let's get with the green. Okay. What else do I need?
So you're going to want some kind of drawing material,
Okay.
and you could have
I
a
have.
variety of things. Something that isn't wet will probably work best.
Okay. I have colored pencils.
Awesome.
Does that work? Or I have like a whole bin of markers.
You know what? Just have maybe everything kind of nearby within arm's reach. Like the best case scenario, I mean, my favorite feeling in the world is when I have like an art studio set up and someone can just like scan around and pick whatever they're feeling drawn to. You might get to a point mid process where it's like, oh my gosh, this is really like a marker moment or a crayon moment, and follow that impulse, I think.
Okay, cool. I'm curious, like, is it just me from I'm curious from your perspective on the inside, is art therapy like a growing thing these days? It seems to be increasing in popularity.
It's a newer field compared to other kind of therapeutic modalities. I think, I mean, because of social media, there's more and more, I think, understanding of the field, but it's also still relatively small. Like when I tell people I'm an art therapist, more often than not, the reaction is, "Oh my gosh, that's a thing." So
Where do you see it like evolving? Where can it's going to keep growing? Where can it go? I mean, I guess like my I know I put a doctor in my name as a bit, but I am not an art therapist. But I do believe very strongly in the value that like I think every single person should have their own art practice. It's so valuable and so important. How do you see that not only the art therapy field as a profession, but like I'm really high on creativity as a practice and trying to preach that as much as possible. Where do you see art therapy the field
hmm,
going?
I hope something like societally changes in the coming years, where we start to shift this idea that creativity just belongs to a certain privileged or talented, like heavy air quotes around those, a certain privileged or talented few. I think hopefully, and this, I mean, I hope is a benefit of social media, people being exposed to content like yours, content hopefully like mine, where they kind of have a sense of permission to step into the creative process, even if it doesn't resemble what they've been taught to think is good. So I think whether it's in like a formal clinical art therapy setting or if it's just, you know, reaching for whatever kids art supplies you can find at the dollar store and giving yourself permission to play, I think something is happening where adults especially feel increasingly emboldened to make just for the sheer joy of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. And you brought up social media a couple times. I know that that's sort of become like your, I guess, thesis statement is like how to survive and feel well on social media in this day and age where like you're just constantly bombarded with nonsense and negativity and there's so much demand from every person. Um, yeah, maybe if you could talk to me a little bit about how that came about, how that sort of became your mission statement, I guess we can call it.
Yeah. Yeah, this question of what wellness could mean when we choose to be online has kind of become all encompassing for me. It's become this sort of shtick I can't get away from. And I think it stems firstly from the fact that I'm just a person who spends a lot of time online. Um, and I think it's something I hear just in my own brain and also from clients all the time is that so many of us feel like our time online feels contentious, right? It splits our attention. There's this comparison. It's hard to put down. It, is designed to drum up all sorts of negative emotions. Like there's so many reasons that we're all familiar with why social media can negatively impact our mental health. And so many of us don't actually feel like we have the choice to leave altogether, right?
Mhm.
Like you and I are people who both use the internet and use social media as a tool in our livelihood, right? I think it takes a certain amount of like social and financial leverage to thrive without the free tools baked into social media. So we're
Mhm.
kind of left with this paradox between the ways our time online is really really useful and meaningful and nourishing and community building, right? All that is real. And it's also based on algorithms designed to sell us things, right? It's
Yeah.
not designed with
Or
our psychological well being in mind.
even I find beyond just selling things, most social platforms algorithms are based off of engagement and no one's commenting 65 times when they agree. So it's really
Exactly.
built off of like arguments and disagreements and hostility is what performs well. But yeah, I think there's people out there, yourself is one of them, like putting positivity and creating content from a good place and making the internet a better place. I even love like um, your prompts that you put online are so like each one has such a relatable kind of hook to it, which is very social media thinking, but in a positive way. You're using it properly, where it's like, here's a practice for people with ADHD, and here's a practice for if you're having a bad day or if you're overtired. Like they're very specific niche titles that are actually helpful and good. So I very much appreciate that. What's it like being a content creator and having to feed the beast and being a part of it?
Truthfully, I'm burned out, right? I think I'm in this funny moment with my relationship with social media. I think I finished the book a year ago and haven't found my way back to really constantly creating content. And so like without the ability to feed the beast, like it's it's been interesting to be kind of punished by the algorithm and to see kind of the growth flatline and the interest flatline. It's it's an interesting thing. I'm feeling kind of betrayed by the algorithm, or well, not that I
Yeah.
expected it owed me anything to begin with, but it's this contentious relationship I have where it is the reason I could build this work, right? And put
Yeah.
this, this book into the world. And
The Art of
go
Thriving Online,
figure.
available
Yes,
now.
I'm kind of gesturing to
Yeah.
to my
Yeah.
book behind me. And I mean, go figure, writing a book about the ways that social media impacts your mental health doesn't make you feel super jazzed about doing the unpaid labor of
Yeah.
creating content for the internet.
Yeah. I mean, I could somewhat relate to the degree where something that I constantly struggle with was just I get so busy and I always have so much, I feel like I have so much to do that the art practice, my own personal art practice, is typically the first thing to suffer. It's the first thing that gets cut because I don't have time for it. So this project that I'm doing is part of it, selfishly, is really a way to force myself to
Mhm.
make a practice out of being an artist and making art. And it's very funny to me, the irony of like, whenever I'm getting overworked and stressed and burnt out and have no energy and don't want to do it, I'm like, I'm literally like my own self-fulfilling prophecy. I got to just make art. That's the cure to all the ailments. So yeah, it's funny to me that I'm constantly reminded of my own like mission through
Yeah.
my own struggles. But
And do
yeah,
you
what
feel
was what
like
was
the art has changed? Like, do you feel like taking this project as like an excuse or a motivation to dive back into your creative process? Do you feel like because it's now in public that your process changes and shifts because you're anticipating people's people perceiving it?
I think it's changed, but not because I'm thinking about people seeing it. It's changed because I'm typically the type to come up with an idea and then like work on it on my own for hours upon hours until it's done and then posting that. Whereas now that I'm doing these podcasts and I'm doing live stream art sessions, it's kind of a lot more like, what can I make in the moment that could be done at the end? So
Mm.
my thought in what I'm creating is definitely changing based on content production for sure. But it's interesting, actually.
Oh,
The
interesting.
the previous episode I just did was with an artist who, his perspective is that the videos he's creating to put online is the art, and the making of the art and the art itself that he's making is like an element of that video that's going out there, and that video is the art, which I think is a really
Gosh.
interesting perspective.
Yeah, I think in agreement. It's challenging because like the act of content creation takes creativity, right? There is something in our artist selves that I think gets that need met to put something out there or to take something of ourselves inside and put it into the world, right? Video can be the medium, the narration can be the medium. And I don't know if this feels true for you. There's something that different that happens in my process. Like when I make art for my own therapist, it usually is pretty different from what I make thinking about, what would be useful in a 1 minute and 30-second narrated tutorial for the internet.
Do you take your own medicine? Do you practice your own art therapy? How does the caretaker take care?
I think I'm similar to you. I noticed wanting to come back into the orbit of my creative practice. So created a project for myself. I run a group twice a week called Anti Hustle Art Studio that
Right.
is like creative co-working. We come together, there's a theme, there's prompts, people can do whatever they want. And I started that because I realized I wasn't in my own art practice consistently enough. But then, funny enough, you turn like your own needs into a work project, and now I'm really facilitating instead of using that for my own personal art. It's still good,
Yeah.
still valuable, but it's I've done the capitalism thing again and turned a hobby into a job.
Yeah. I've just in seeing your content, I've seen you talk about like the unlinking of your value with productivity. Can you talk to me a little bit about like ways people might start to do that? Because that's hard to do. Like I'm definitely someone who suffers from that, who needs to be productive 24/7. Otherwise, I don't feel like I'm, servicing myself properly. I don't know if that was the right way to put it.
No. I think it's a universal thing, right? Growing up in this culture. And I mean, what I really want to say to that, because it's something I experienced too, it's not a personal failing, right? It's not a character flaw to measure our worthiness through the lens of productivity because we haven't been shown another way, right?
Yeah.
It's a structural societal failing, and oftentimes it's put back on us as something personal that we have to
Mhm.
fix. But I think in the context of like what can we do about it? For me, I know it's making art that I really deliberately protect from the internet. So I go and see my own art therapist, and the work I
Nice.
make with her is often, I mean, first of all, too vulnerable or too kind of in my own sticky process to want to put out into the world. Yeah, it's really important for me, I think, to have that place that's protected, where at least I have one little corner of my creative practice that I don't need to share or I don't need to edit, right?
Yeah, or yeah, because so much of putting yourself on the internet is like, for lack of a better term, selling yourself to people. You're trying to
Totally.
attract viewers and followers and whatever. It's got to be, yeah, there's got to still be a bit of you that's a human being. How do you maintain a sacred part of yourself while putting yourself out there and still being vulnerable and transparent and honest to an audience? Because that's what I think, you want to put your true self out there. But yeah, how do you think about where the line is drawn?
I mean, you're transitioning us perfectly into the art project we're going to do, but it's we did it. Um, it's a movable line as well. It might feel different from day to day, but I think articulating for ourselves what parts of our lives we want to reserve just to be inhabited, experienced. You know, maybe that is not wanting our relationship or family. Maybe it's not wanting certain pieces of our art. Maybe it's not wanting our hobbies to become fodder for content or commodified in that way. And maybe, you know, on the other side, it's deciding, okay, actually, when I show up online, it's in service of this why. So, I mean, I'll use myself as an example. A couple of years ago, I got really kind of firm with myself about how I want to use social media so that it doesn't take over my life. It did anyways, but um, I really want to use, yeah, my social media platforms to talk about work. Now, work is an expansive thing, right? When it includes art, creativity, mental health, like it includes a lot of big
Yeah,
discussions, but it's, I think, easier for me to draw a line like, yeah, probably not going to share a picture of my lunch or a vacation or whatever other lifestyle pieces, because that's not in service of this greater conversation about
right.
creativity and well-being. I know. How do you draw
Yeah.
that line for yourself?
Good question. I'm for sure still figuring it out. I sort of have a split in my brain where the artist part of me is who I am. That's what I do. It's a need to create every day. And as an artist, I'm constantly trying to just express myself and put my true self out there and thinking of different ways to express my thoughts and ideas and feelings. And then in my head, the content creator, internet personality side of it is like the job of producer, where my job as the
Mm-hmm.
producer is to document this artist and show everyone. I don't know
Oh,
if that's
that's
the
so
best.
useful.
I don't know though, because then it very much feels like work when I'm on this side of it.
Mm.
When I'm editing and filming and doing all the production stuff, it feels
Mm-hmm.
like I literally have a manager hat that I put on to like send emails, because I very much need to be like a silly outlandish artist. And then there's times that I need to like, okay, Tyler, like you have to answer emails and edit a video today and you can't fling paint at the wall. So yeah, I'm definitely keeping myself in check all the time. But
I think it's
yeah, to
useful
answer,
to recognize the different hats, I mean, literally or metaphorically, and like,
yeah,
okay, this is the manager part that is in service of the artist part. I mean, and
yeah,
maybe, I don't know if this is true for you, but maybe that kind of protects the artist self from feeling like their job is to create.
for sure. And like you said, I think that a really valuable takeaway is what you do put out there is what's in service of like your mission that you're trying to do, that the message you're trying to get out. So you don't need to share the lunch that you had because it's not getting people feeling better or engaged with their creativity. Yeah, I think constantly keeping that filter on, and when you're about to, when you think about sharing something, like, is this purposeful, is this helping? Because yeah, I think social media is definitely full of enough salads and gym selfies for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and if we don't have that kind of dividing line, the other risk is total burnout. If every moment of your day is a potential moment for content creation, then you're never not at work, right? That's just
Yeah.
a recipe for burnout, is if you're always scanning every moment of your life, trying to decide whether or not this is in line with your personal brand, or how you can bring it in line with your personal brand, right?
Yeah. I do think the one silver lining to potentially oversharing, or at least people who share a lot online, is it does sort of force you, like if you don't want to put out negativity or you don't want to make it look like your life sucks, it kind of forces you to focus on positives and focus on what's good and what you want to show off and flaunt.
Mm.
So there is an element to it that, like, I don't want to say it suppresses negativity, but it does kind of like shift one's focus away from it a bit more. So there, I think
Mm.
there's small little positives to it at times.
Oh, completely. Like I'll be the first person to say that, like, I don't think social media is a bad thing. It's a complicated thing, but I think it's a really useful tool for like bringing down stigma and
Yeah.
being in connection.
And I always say, like, I'm very conscious of what I've curated my feeds to look like. So when I
Mm.
open Instagram, I'm just getting enriched with like artworks and stuff, that a bit of pro wrestling, but mostly stuff that I want to look at. And I find that, like, one of my biggest qualms with social media is the societal pressure from like friends and people that I know, that you're supposed to follow and you're supposed to stay engaged and view their stories and this and that. And like, no offense to anybody, I don't care to see anyone's life. I just want to see what they're making.
And I think it's totally reasonable to decide that, okay, social media for me is a place of engaging with, my interest in wrestling or art, or it's where I go to um, learn about like the social justice conversations I want to be involved in, right? It might be a tool of staying in touch with friends and family. It might also be something you use for another realm of your life, but it's really okay to draw those dividing lines and not have it be all encompassing.
Staying in touch with friends and family is what Facebook is for.
Yes. Yep.
Presenting a way to make life a lot simpler. The Clapper.
Okay, so let's dive
Let's
into
dive
some
in.
art. How do I get started?
So,
Or first,
I mean, you
do
set
you
us
want to
up
like,
perfectly.
okay, you take it from here.
Yeah, no, I mean, you set us up so perfectly with this conversation about like the division between what we want to put online, what we want to keep offline, and how we maintain that balance. So what we're going to be doing, and I can show a little example of like what I did as a potential finished product. You can see these two paper beads strung on my string here. What we're going to do is make a paper bead as a way of kind of taking some of the ideas about the things in our lives that we might want to hold back from the internet and actually concealing them inside of something that can be a
Ooh.
wearable reminder of what we want to show versus what we want to keep to ourselves, keep private. So what you're going to do on this first side of the paper is start to do some brainstorming about what feels empowering to share online. What you're going to start by doing is doing just a bit of brainstorming. And you can do this with words. You can also do this with symbols, colors. But the idea is on this side of the paper to start brainstorming what feels empowering to share online. So,
Cool.
for me, things like dopamine dressing or craft projects,
What was the first
certain
one?
kinds of like dopamine dressing. Like I love to put on a silly outfit and document that.
Oh yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Is that a personal style thing, or is there more of like a conscious like social media brand presence
Oh,
to the
completely.
outfits? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is totally an aside, but I found something changed in the way social media was engaging with me when I started wearing kind of big colorful glasses. Like the recognition, or just like, gosh, it
It's
feels
like
weird
a,
to say brand identity of that. Like it's a bit of a
yeah.
costume to put on, but also I find there's something nice in like the somatic cue of, okay, I am now in my public facing persona to have this thing
Yeah,
on my face.
the old manager hat. Um,
Yeah, exactly, right?
I find the thing I struggle with is my taste and decision making brain loves bright colors and all sorts of tie dye and all sorts of like as loud as possible. But then when I'm actually getting dressed, like all I wish I had like a black t-shirt and some jeans, but all my clothes is based on like what I like visually, but it's not necessarily what
Mm.
I want to wear, but then that's all I own. So I find my closet is full of bright things that I don't feel like wearing, but that I picked out because they were bright in a store and I was attracted to it.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to balance the like what like in a sensory way do I want to be putting on my body? Also sometimes
Yeah,
like I mean, yeah, for me as well, I think half my wardrobe is black and very, very simple because sometimes I
nice.
want the creative process to be happening on the page as opposed to on the body, but I
I
digress.
get that. Okay, so should I start sharing things that feel empowering to share?
Yeah, empowering or positive. Like what is it that you really love to put on the internet?
Okay. So I'm gonna put my art, but then I'm separately gonna put art practices.
Mhm.
Art practice. Um, I like to put, is positivity too vague? What about like
No.
wow, I
And at this
really
point, this can what were you saying?
I was just gonna say I didn't realize I really tricked you into a free therapy session. Silver linings. I find my
Hmm.
I find my favorite because I've for the last like 15 years been mainly focused in like the comedy world, and there's a lot of
Mhm.
different forms of comedy. There's self-deprecating, blah blah blah. I think my favorite kind is the silver lining, the like identifying something
Uh-huh.
really really bad and horrible and terrible, but you know, but I
Mhm.
really, especially in my art as well, I love that but. I love that there's, capitalism's crumbling and the climate's falling apart and there's this and that and there's a million things wrong in the world. But you could go outside and step in some grass and touch a tree, and that's pretty damn cool. I love
And
the
there's like a
butt.
lightheartedness to your content too. Like I know I was really drawn in by, oh, like you and I are having similar conversations about everyone deserving to feel creative and what that can look like and how that can feel. And there's such a funny like tongue-in-cheek pointing a finger back at like the institutions that prevent that. Like I know it's a
That's
deliberate choice to call yourself doctor, right?
yeah, that's
And kind
kind
of
of the point.
point
Yeah.
fun back at that, you know,
Yeah.
the gatekeeping of academia or whatever it is. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's yeah, my whole MO is like unqualified moron, so I like being a doctor from that position.
let's bring the realm of the visual into this. So you've started with some words, some symbols I can see, but does color belong here, right? What colors, textures, shapes might want to be added to this, right? We've used kind of the cognitive and analytical side of our brains to do the brainstorming of like what information belongs here. But now you can kind of maybe step into the intuitive of like what how do these ideas want to be expressed or want to be added to with color, line, texture, shape, value. I think those are the five elements of art, if I can remember them correctly. And you don't need to think too hard about this, right? You can work totally spontaneously and on impulse.
Talk to me a little bit about the book.
Yeah.
What first of all, okay, first of all, what is the book for those who aren't aware?
So the book is The Art of Thriving Online, creative exercises to help you stay grounded and feel joy in the world of social media. Um, and essentially, it is a creative workbook about, again, this question of what it might mean to author a definition of wellness for ourselves when we choose to be on the internet, when we choose to engage with social media. And I mean, my perspective is there's really no one size fits all plan or set of hacks that can make the internet bearable, right? I know for myself, I'm a person who doesn't do consistency or discipline very well. I think that's pretty common, right? So I think instead of prescribing, here's the 10 steps to a digital detox or the rules that you should follow, it's so much more therapeutically useful
Yeah.
to have people explore for themselves and using art and creativity what wellness actually means for them, right? What it is about these tools and this technology that feels so challenging or feels so good. So the workbook is divided into chapters on themes like attention, productivity and urgency, comparison, fear, anger, disinformation, and then there's belonging, place, body, right? So all these kind of realms of our lives that get touched by our relationships with the internet. And in each chapter, there's a whole bunch of art and writing prompts, as well as kind of research and anecdotes to help you, really unpack your relationship with social media and come to your own definition of what it could mean to feel okay or to thrive when the internet is something that you plan to coexist with for the rest of your life or a portion of your life.
Yeah. How do you come up with those sort of practices? I'm sure the art therapy background and education and therapy is a big factor, but what are the main like elements that you want to include in a good art therapy practice and specific to thriving online?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, my favorite
Thanks.
thing in the whole world is coming up with art prompts. I think if I could just do that all day, every day, I think that's what I'd want to do. But for me, what makes a really good art prompt, and I often use the term invitation because people can take it or leave it, right? It doesn't need to be followed exactly the way I write it or in exactly the way I've shown it, but it's an invitation into exploring it for yourself. But what makes a good art invitation, I think, is a balance between specific and open ended. So, like, for example, in what we're doing right now, I haven't told you exactly what to write. I haven't told you where to write it or what it should look like. Um, but also, there's enough of a prompt to get started so you're not feeling kind of unmoored and lost in the process or where to start it. So I think that's one place. And I think the other thing that makes a really good prompt is like the question that gets asked afterward. So after someone's had this encounter with art materials with themselves, the question of, okay, what just happened, right? So holding not just the process, but being able to look at it afterwards and reflect on, like, how did that feel for me? What am I noticing in this now? Like, what might this piece of art have to tell me that I wasn't aware of before? I think is a really, really big part of the process.
A hungry giant! Hungry for a big honey taste.
Big taste, honeycomb.
One of my favorite questions to ask when I'm kind of at that point in a piece of art of like, is this finished? Am I ready? Is just like to literally imagine that art has a voice for itself and ask like, okay, is there anything else you need or anything else you want before
I
it's
love
time to
that.
move on or time to be complete?
Yeah, because it's such I mean, any artist, anyone that makes anything, one of the uh, toughest parts and like most interesting parts is when it's done. How do you know when it's done? Only you know, and you still don't really know. How do you approach something being finished? What
Ooh,
tells you?
it's much tougher in an art therapy sense, like with a painting, right? In kind of my previous life as a fine artist, there would be a moment where compositionally something felt harmonious, or maybe even to bring it into like my experience in the body, like my nervous system could kind of settle looking at it. When it comes to art therapy, I think it's really different, right? The life cycle of the art, I think, doesn't end when a piece is complete, right? It includes what happens to it next. So, like, am I going to display it? Am I going to recycle it? Do I want to destroy it? Right? That I think is also a part of the life of the art. So, again, it depends.
Yeah. Okay, so I have the things that feel empowering to share.
Hmm.
What's next?
So flip over your paper now. We're going to work on the back side. And now we're going to do the same thing again, brainstorming with kind of words and language first. So what feels empowering to keep offline? And know that you don't need to have the same number of things here. You don't need to have something, a list of specific, right? There's no right way or wrong way to do this brainstorming. You might also think of things later on. But I mean, for me, some examples are like things I'm currently struggling with, maybe things I'm working on in therapy that I haven't like metabolized yet. Stories of my clients, right? I'm never going to share things about people who I have a trusting and like clinical relationship with. I might not share the art I make for my own therapy. I might not share like my sexual experiences or my lunch, right? So what for you feels empowering to leave in the personal realm and not share with the internet?
You know what's crazy though? I find so much, maybe it's just that I'm like this is what my algorithms are giving me, but I
Mm-hmm.
find so many creators are just like so many people get quote unquote successful as content creators by just telling people how to be successful content creators. And there's this
Oh my
weird
gosh.
like the online uh economy of content is like it's like the snake eating its own tail where like everyone's making it by telling each other how to make it. It kind of
Uh-huh.
doesn't make sense to me. I feel like there's a weird I have like a dystopian vision of it where we're just like feeding algorithms what it wants, but no one's really like interacting or engaging or learning or growing with one another.
Oh my gosh. Like I have a personal example of this. Um, probably about once a week used to be more frequent when I was more active online. But the number one question asked is, oh my gosh, how do I become an art therapist? Right? If people haven't heard of it before or there's some resonance with the idea of this as being a job, people are really curious about like how do you even become this kind of professional? And so I found like also especially when I do TikTok lives, I spend the entire time answering the question about what kind of master's degree a person would need. And so eventually I kind of thought to myself, okay, I'm burning out answering this question. I don't have the capacity to spend all day in my DMs repeating the same thing. Also, don't owe that to anybody. So ended up making just like a webinar with another art therapist about like the education and credentials process in Canada and the States to put up as a resource. But something really interesting happened in that moment where there was so much more demand for that conversation than the actual work I offer as an art therapist. And I realized, like, ooh, this is kind of an uncomfortable place. I don't want to be an art therapist business coach, but that would be a much more lucrative job than being an art therapist.
But there's a lot of people doing that. And it's not even how to
Yeah.
be an art therapist, it's how to be like an art facilitator or an art therapy coach. And there's like
Yes.
interesting wording around don't go get the degree, but you could kind of do it. It's weird. I don't know. It feels like there's a lot of awkward gray area in there.
Oh, I mean, I'll resist the urge to go like full
Yeah, yeah.
Hulk
Not that
and
show.
get totally on my soapbox, but like what's important for people to know is art therapy is a protected term. Art therapist is a protected term. In the same way someone can't call
Yeah.
themselves um psychiatrist or I don't say or doctor. I mean, you pay
Yeah.
for your degree.
Well, I'm
But like in
I'm
the
a
same way
little
those are protected
concerned.
terms.
I'm a little worried because I've been doing the doctor bit as a comedian for so long, and now I am
Mhm.
kind of getting into this. I guess like I'm dipping my toes in like the wellness world a little bit, in like the benefits of creativity as a practice, and I'm really preaching it more and more. And there's a part of me that's like, oh damn, like I'm like no better than Dr. Phil or some of those like carny doctors, Dr. Oz. Then like none of I'm as much a doctor as that guy.
Yeah, but you're not selling a supplement yet, so I
Yeah,
think you're
not yet.
okay.
They're working hard in the lab. We're figuring it out. New formula. Um, things to empowering to keep offline.
So you might even like just go to the realm of the absurd for a second if it's challenging to think of things. Like, are you gonna live stream like Wednesday night dinner with your partner? Are you gonna make content of your dog's poop this morning, or
Maybe.
whatever it is. Maybe. But like thinking about, actually, it would feel weird to post that kind of thing.
Yeah. I posted the other day, I was out walking my dog and I saw he started like licking this water bottle on the ground like that was half full of pee, which is gross. But then as I was thinking about it, I was like, wow, half full of pee. I am an optimist. Um,
There's the king, and he has the queen just to the left of it. Bam! There she goes.
I want to ask you about the workshops that you do and the weekly like sessions that you do, because you do that it's separately. You do like here's a prompt, or you could show up and work on whatever you want to work on, but this is the time and place, and you're creating the space for it.
Mhm.
And then you also do like workshops with an actual like here's what we're going to learn today. Let's start with the sessions. Sorry, remind me the name of the club.
Oh
The
yeah, it's Anti Hustle Art Studio.
the Anti-Hustle Art Studio. I love that. How did that come about, and what's that like? You're kind of like forming this community around it. How's it going?
It's good. It's cozy. It's really, like we were talking about, it's a space I needed just to have the accountability of actually getting into my studio and making something, even if I'm also holding the dual role of like facilitating and kind of coming up with the prompts. But the rationale behind it is that it's really hard to carve out time for creative practices, even if we know that that's something that makes us feel good and alive in the world. So the idea behind it is it's creative co-working. So it's essentially a body doubling space where you can sign on, drop in. There's a theme every week. There's art prompts every week. You can take them or leave them. Some people come and work on a quilt or do their morning pages or whatever it is they're feeling called toward. But it's just this protected hour that we have twice a week to get together and like use art as a way of caring for ourselves. So it's been going for
Yeah.
about 3 years now. Um,
And
and
same day,
that's,
same time?
yeah,
You
same
do
day,
it
same
same day,
time.
same
Every
time?
Tuesday evening, every Wednesday morning.
Cool.
Hmm.
So do you often find yourself finishing the thing from the previous day?
Sometimes it depends. I mean, I also kind of drift in between a lot of things. I don't finish much of what I start. I mean, as an artist generally, I don't finish much of what I
Yeah.
start. And, that's also named as being totally okay and encouraged in the space. But sometimes if I get into a juicy process on a Tuesday night, I'm really excited to get back to it on the Wednesday morning.
Nice. And then so you also do workshops. What's the latest one that you did, or an upcoming one that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I have one that's coming up at the beginning of January that I've also run for 3 years, about kind of rethinking New Year's resolutions. Like, I really dislike that pressure of like new year, new me we all feel in January. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a workbook of thinking about like being so radically gentle on ourselves. Like if we're going to be ambitious, make plans or goals or intentions for the new year, then let's also be ambitious in the ways that we plan to be like really nice to ourselves if it doesn't go as planned, or set not just kind of measurable goals or whatever the standard advice is, but like what would it be like if you just set yourself really attainable goals based on how you want to feel versus what you want to achieve by society standards. So that's kind of similar to the workbook, The Art of Thriving Online, where there's a couple chapters to kind of reflect, figure out what kinds of intentions you want to set using art and writing. So that's a workshop I'll be running January 4th, January 6th, whatever that Saturday is. I'll send you the information. But that's a yearly thing where folks can come and I'll get the workbook. They can start the workbook in the workshop together, have a chance to like share and do it with other people, or they can simply take the workbook, download it, and work on it at their own pace.
I love that. I'm very much at the starting line of this journey where I too am going to attempt to like cultivate a bit of a community around
Mhm.
creativity and making time for it and creating a space for it so that people can come and engage with themselves. Um, is there anything you could share with me? Any tips or advice on cultivating community, specifically centered
Mm.
around creativity?
Yeah, and before we get into that, if you're at a place in your process where you're feeling stuck, you can also just start exploring visually and see what happens as well.
On it.
Just to give you that invitation, if it feels
Thank you.
right to kind of switch out of verbal, uh, linguistic space into visual. But when it comes to cultivating community, I mean, I have mixed feelings about using the phrase community to describe groups online. I still do. I still use community to talk about anti-hustle or like other groups I'm running or a part of. But yeah, it feels challenging when it's a community formed around one person, right? The facilitator, when that person has a financial incentive, when that person gets to make unilateral decisions. Um, so yes, I still think it belongs in the realm of community, but it's not the same as, say, you know, the community that meets to play chess at your local library, or the meal train for the person who's just had a kid in your friend group. Like there's a different way of thinking about it. I don't know if that was a total tangent, but
No, that makes sense. But is there anything like when you're
Mhm.
hosting, I totally can get how, yeah, like especially in your position as a therapist, you're trying to make it about the people, but then you're the one talking and you're the one on camera and you're the one with all the attention. How do you
Mhm.
kind of approach that? How do you
Yeah.
make space for them?
Ooh. This is a really interesting question because depending on the format of the group, it really changes. Uh, like for example, if I'm running a group where we're going to meet like over 6 weeks, it's going to be the same people. New people aren't going to be added, right? And there's a chance for those group members to build trust over time and to build vulnerability over time. We might start off having a conversation at the beginning about like what are our group norms? How do we want to engage with each other? Right? We might have expectations like we're not going to comment on each other's art or make suggestions. We're not going to compare ourselves or whatever it's going to be to keep people safe, right? And there'll usually in groups like that be kind of a longer um, kind of setup discussion about, right? Like when we go around the circle, we all have 3 minutes to share or something like that, so people don't end up taking up 10 minutes or taking up all the space. So anyways, what I mean to say, the TLDR version of that is in groups where there's going to be kind of a longer term relationship building and trust between participants, I'll do kind of a bigger setup, so that there's some safety and some expectations around how we share and engage with each other. But when it comes to groups where it's really drop in, um, I think it has to be formatted in a different way to ensure that people feel safe and comfortable. Like for example, in Anti-Hustle Art Studio, people are muted the whole time. I don't open it up for sharing out loud because we haven't done that kind of setup. Um, and because I can't necessarily kind of contain it, right? If someone comes and has felt really activated by the topic and really needs to process, that hour probably isn't the space where I'm going to be able to hold something therapeutically for them. And also
Mhm.
not fair necessarily on the other participants who've come and haven't expected the group to go in that direction.
Yeah.
I think this is a very long way of saying setting expectations that match what's actually possible to do and hold within the group, I think is a really helpful way of supporting people in knowing what to expect and knowing how they can share and engage with each other, uh, that actually fits inside the parameters of the group that's being run. I don't know. What are your response to all that? I feel like I kind of went
Well,
into theory for a second, and I'm not sure if it relates to what you're talking about.
For sure, absolutely. So when you're doing it, is it like over Zoom where everyone can see everyone, or on another
Hmm.
platform, but everyone's visible?
Not necessarily. So
Okay.
maybe this would be the example between these two kinds of groups. Like in Anti Hustle Art Studio, people can have their cameras off. And I think about half the participants keep their cameras off. And the opportunity for sharing at the end, people are invited if they choose to hold up their work and be witnessed, right? To have that moment of sharing. But it's always optional, right? Whereas in perhaps a smaller group with consistent members, we might encourage people during opening and closing to all have cameras on and to all, like, no one ever has to share for sure, but there's a different set of expectations around how present people are going to be to participate, but also like show up and be present as others are vulnerable in sharing what they've made. So the expectations in Anti Hustle are, I don't want to say lower. They're different and they're flexible. So people can come and keep their camera off the entire time, not share anything. And I think that doesn't feel unsafe because it's not like some people are stepping into a moment of, you know, unmuting themselves and talking about like a deep, personal, vulnerable process.
Yeah, that makes sense because I'm definitely figuring that out. I'm doing something similar where Tuesday nights I go live and I curate like a playlist that I want to listen to. So my thing is I'm muted. There's no one coming on. There's no one calling in. I'm active in the chat, and whoever wants to talk is willing, more than welcome to like engage in the chat with me. But we're just there to make art and listen to music. Um, and it's funny. I've done
Yeah.
three of them. I've only done three so far. The first one I didn't really promote or tell anyone about. I had like a handful of viewers and only one comment, but the one comment was like, "Hey man, I had a really shitty day and this really helped and this is awesome." So like,
Hmm.
what a win. What a successful launch.
Oh.
Yeah, the
Well, and that's
response
such a
so
good
far,
example. Yeah.
it's been a
How's the
great
response
response.
been?
On the second stream, I had a lot more engagement, and then there was one guy. We'll go back to this in a moment. There was one guy who I asked the chat like, "What's everyone working on?" And there was one guy who was like, "Yeah, like I have some ideas, but they're dumb ideas." And I
Mm.
was like, "Listen, first of all, ideas are not ours. We just hear them and pick them up. So they're not your dumb ideas. You just heard them. So I would love to hear them." And after several rounds of him being like, "Nah, I'm not going to do it. And they're not good. And I have bad ideas," he finally said it. And it was like the coolest idea. He was like, "I want to set up lights and hang art in my backyard and make this outdoor art gallery idea." And I was like, "Buddy, you're insane. That's such a cool idea."
Hmm. Well, what a
Yeah.
good example
So,
of like setting up parameters that fit the medium and the space, right? It would have been such a different experience if everybody in the chat was expected to engage with you in a certain way, right? It sounds like that person in the second live, you know, you were chatting, kind of building a little bit of relationship in the way that you could in that platform, in that medium, and it felt encouraging and safe enough to eventually share a piece. But if it had been, say, you know, someone joins you on live and you have no idea what context they're bringing in, and suddenly they're unpacking the trauma behind their art,
yeah.
like that, you know, oh my gosh, that would be a much different medium that maybe, you know, isn't the right one that you want to be holding space for. Once you feel like you're at a place where it feels comfortable to pause, it might be useful to notice, like, what's the difference between the front side and the back side? Like, even just visually, you could even squint your eyes. Like, what's the difference in vibe between these two sides of the paper?
Ooh. Well,
What do you notice?
biggest difference between front side and back side is one makes pee and one makes poo. Am I right? No, I would say that the keep offline has a lot more lines to it and a lot more rigidness, I think. And this one, the keeping online feels a lot more flowy and loose. Um, Also, the colors. This one's a bit harsher, darker, more jarring. um, and this one feels lighter and brighter.
Hmm. You're such like a natural natural art therapy client. Like this is the kind of conversation we might have in a real session, starting to like
Cool.
use the lenses of like phenomenology to like, what am I noticing about these? What might that tell me? We won't dive into a massive process around the differences, but like the noticing you're already doing, like there's a lot of information coming through there. But
For
the
sure.
next thing,
I feel better already.
good. The next thing you're going to do is grab some scissors and you're going to cut long triangles kind of like this from your page.
This
And also,
way,
you know,
along this,
it
or
could be
this
either
way.
direction. I may find lengthways,
Okay.
but whatever impulsively you think.
Do you have like a favorite like material or like art therapy medium to go to?
Oh,
'Cause I know
again,
you
it so
use like
depends.
you recycle a lot, you reuse a lot, you use a lot of interesting materials. It's not just crayons all the time.
I mean, it's funny you say that because my favorite material, just personally at the moment, is these like 3-in-1 Stabilo kind of crayon,
Ooh,
pencil, watercolor things. But that's
cool.
just a material I'm enjoying and having my own
Nice.
hyperfixation around. But gosh, I mean, in terms of having my therapist hat on, it totally depends on the person and the process, their kind of comfort level with different materials. That said, I think, God, collage is just such a
Mm,
useful material because, one, the images don't rely on any technical drawing or painting or rendering skills. And something really cool happens when someone starts to just combine different collage images they find from a magazine. Like the free association and the meaning that starts to get made happens really fast and doesn't require someone having a comfort level with art materials. So oftentimes when someone's feeling maybe a little bit nervous about like the blank page or picking up a pencil, I'll pull out a bin of collage materials that are pre-cut and they can start sorting through them and combining them. I think that's a really accessible way into exploring visually.
I have drawers full of them.
Oh, right on.
What's the like strangest material that you've used either personally or in a session? Well, like, is there anything? How would you react if someone made something really true to themselves and expressed themselves really well and technically did good art therapy, but needed to use some questionable, borderline immoral mediums?
I mean, health and safety, first of all. I mean, I'm going to go into kind of a boring answer here. I'm tracking for someone's like safety while they're using materials, right? That's always going to be the thing that comes first. But like, if someone wanted to use their period blood in art, amazing. If someone wanted to use like the ashes of a family member in art, amazing. I'm trying to think of like things that could be like contentious materials.
Just don't
If
get
someone
E.
wants to draw on
coli.
the
That's about it.
walls.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think sometimes my favorite processes are when someone maybe comes to session and apologizes because they don't have materials with them. And then we get to use something totally different and still have a
Cool.
creative process. Like I've had someone dump out their laundry basket before and start using that to
Whoa.
make sculptures and installations.
That's awesome. I love that. And it is like, I find even in like standard talk therapy, I find the ones where you kind of come without a predetermined, here's what I want to talk about and here's what I'm dealing with and
Yes.
here's those are like the valuable ones where you can kind of dig and find out what you need to find out.
Oh, I love those sessions. Something really brilliant happens, especially when someone arrives maybe thinking, I don't have anything kind of on my mind today. And in those circumstances, I might say, okay, well, let's just start making spontaneously, see what materials you gravitate toward, just make a mark, make another, let's see where it goes. And without fail, something profound always comes out of that type of process where the unconscious gets to be in the driver's seat.
Yeah. And I find so much of creativity is about getting to that unconscious state so that you can kind of, like, I really view creativity as you shut off your brain and you kind of exist only in your hands, and your brain is just like a radio that picks up signals to pilot your hands around. Um,
Hmm.
is like I'm currently reading a book about the flow state. Is that because I know that that's like a big thing in terms of happiness and wellness, and it contributes so much to people's lives? But is that a component of art therapy, or is that something totally different? Because that you
Oh,
kind of
I
have
was
to
hoping you
be
were going there.
challenged,
Yeah,
right?
no, absolutely is. I think flow, I think, is the opposite of burnout, right? And there's so few moments in
Mm.
our lives, especially if we have demanding jobs, where we get to put aside being really task oriented and engage the default mode network of the brain. That's where our brain goes when we're not necessarily like thinking or planning. It's where we go and we daydream, right? That's often where ideas come from. So the places you go when you can start just naturally making connections, like when your hands are engaged doing something and you're not making specific decisions or trying to execute something specifically, like the ideas and connections that get made in that space, like that's where the unconscious really starts to put things together and integrate. What you're going to do now is you're going to actually roll these up. So keeping the what feels empowering to keep offline, you're going to start at the wide end, and it might be useful to have like
I
a
have some
pen
practice
or a
with this.
pencil. And you'll roll it around itself. So everything that feels empowering to keep offline is going to be concealed on the inside of this bead. Now, and something
Cool.
I should have said before you started is it might be useful to have some glue somewhere, like, I don't know, like an inch up the wide end, and maybe a little bit on the very end as well, so it actually sticks to itself. But tape could also
Or can I?
work.
Yeah, I'm gonna tape.
Yeah, tape it. Go for it.
So in terms of, like, we're talking flow state and creativity, do you have any sort of like personal practice for coming up with ideas? Like how do you visualize it, and what's that
Mm.
practice like for you?
Oh, I think it comes from engaging in a flow state, right? I think bilateral drawing is one of my favorite practices to kind of do ideation, and that's when I hold a drawing material in both hands and use a big piece of paper, usually
Ooh.
standing up, and kind of scribble and move both sides of my body at the same time. Like that's often a place where ideas arrive. Free writing is often a place where that happens. But I think when it comes to kind of coming up with ideas, it usually starts with a creative practice that requires a degree of focus, but not decision making. Crocheting is another example for me of something I can do kind of mindlessly, but I'm still engaged actively.
Totally. I totally get that. I have a when I'm trying to come up with original new ideas. So there's this practice that I like to do. It's not even when I'm trying to come up. It's just a practice that I like to do from time to time to replenish the idea list. Is I'll sit down with just a notepad and like a pen or pencil next to me, and I'll close my eyes and I kind of envision a conveyor belt, kind of like a
Mm.
airport baggage claim, and there's boxes, and a box will stop in front of me. I can open it and take out whatever's inside. And by the time I do that, it's something. I don't know what it is, but there's something to take out. And then I can kind of examine it and decide if it's worth exploring more, and if I want to go deeper, or if I want to put it back in the box, close it up, and wait for the next one to come. And I kind of have this like conveyor belt line of ideas until there's one that's worth opening my eyes and writing down.
I love that visualization and that process of like receiving and opening something up. And I imagine more often than not, pretty quickly you find an idea that piques your curiosity, or that when you start to do the unpacking and the opening, something's there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the part, like the only part that I feel actually a part of and engaged with is like the decision making of, is this worth keeping, or should I keep going?
Right. Like that's maybe when the manager hat comes in, or a version
Yeah.
of like a different editor comes in. I
Yeah.
think, like my version of that, if I'm feeling really stuck, and this is a process I used a lot when I was writing the book, is I'll grab my big anthology of Mary Oliver poems, open it up
Ooh.
randomly, kind of slam my finger down to something, and without fail, if I use that as a writing prompt and just see where it guides me over a couple pages, it'll guide me somewhere. Like something fruitful is going to come out.
Yeah.
And normally it's a little bit of a shortcut to jumpstart my brain. I usually end up writing about whatever is kind of on my mind or on my heart, but having an entry point
Yeah.
makes
You
it a little
know,
bit more possible.
I've been journaling for many years now, and I start each one the same way, where I don't know what I want to say. I don't know, like, I know if there's things I'm feeling that I want to express and get out of me, then it's time to journal. But I never know how to start a journal. So I always write, they say it's hard to know what to write about, but, and then by the time I get to the end of the sentence, I have the end of the sentence. It is just coming out of me because I've said the first half.
They say it's hard to know what to write about, but oh, that's
And then
good, because I have
I
the
know
same
what to write
problem.
about.
Huh.
Yeah.
Because
That's
I find if
my
I
little
just
trick.
start writing without a prompt, I end up writing to-do lists or writing about the stress
Yeah,
of productivity, right? If there's not the structure of Mary Oliver or a prompt like that to get
yeah,
going.
totally.
Hmm.
Productivity. Even like I recently I want to get off screens as much as possible. So I transferred all my to-dos and all my like agenda stuff to post-it notes on my wall that I could just rip off and crumple up when they're done. But now I live in constant agony of like visualizing everything I need to do. It's all part of it. So I
Hmm.
have my things all rolled up.
You have
I
your
don't have a
beads. Do you have
lighter, but
some string?
yes, I have
Do you have some?
string.
Yeah, grab a length of string. Um,
Okay.
and this could be a necklace. This could be something you hang around the rearview mirror of your car. But you've created these objects, this artifact of a process of reflection. On the outside, you explored what feels empowering to put online, like what you like the world to see of yourself, of your process, what feels good. And inside each of these little beads, these little kind of cocoons now, even, is what feels correct to conceal or just keep toward yourself. What's your sense of where this wants to go or what it wants to become next? Like, do you have any ideas that come to mind about where it wants to be?
I think I want to keep it in here somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where yet. Maybe, hmm. Yeah, I got to find a good home for this. Maybe by the desk over in the corner because that's where I do most of my work. And this is a good reminder that there's a Tyler that exists offline as well. But
Look at that.
I'm very excited to put this online though, so that other people could try this at home.
Mm-hmm.
This is awesome. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
gonna
it's neat to see the
tie it
whole
up.
process from start to finish.
Yes. There we go.
The
My
wearable
new chain.
reminder.
Amelia, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for
Um,
having me. This felt like getting to be on Art Attack. So a dream, a
I
dream
appreciate
fulfilled.
that. I am flattered. I'm going to put all your links and website in the description of this video. Do you have anything else you want to plug? Anything you want to say to the people out there?
Um, go make some art. Go start with whatever materials you feel excited about. Just start. Give yourself that space. It's such a generous thing to carve out time to make things just for the sake of making things, just because it's life affirming, just because it feels good. But in terms of where you can find me, I'm Art Therapy IRL, or Art Therapy in Real Life. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram. That's my website. Again, my book is around and available in audio or print. That's The Art of Thriving Online, wherever you like to buy books. And yeah, if you'd like to hang out and have a space twice a week to stay gently accountable to making art and hanging out with other people who are doing the same thing. Anti-Hustle Art Studio is every Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning, but you'll link all those things if people want to go find them.
Amazing. So the final thing is I like each guest to give, it could be from this episode, it could be anything you want. I'm going to take this Sharpie and just write a quote of yours on my wall.
Oh. You don't have to punish yourself into healing.
Wow, you don't have to punish yourself into healing.
It doesn't have to be self-discipline, doesn't have to be willpower. Sometimes, and I think often, the parts in us that want attention, want healing, are really met and fed by being real darn nice, real darn playful with ourselves. Doesn't all have to be hard.
Amen. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I'll see you online.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
A good steak pun is a rare medium well done. Hey, thanks so much for watching. You could check out last week's episode over here, or you could watch the last live art hang over here. And you should hit the subscribe button. I don't know. It feels like I'm asking for a lot right now. How do people do this? You're supposed to like have a guy at the end talking to subscribe here and do this here. Do whatever you want. See if I care.